In this video, we will learn three very important concepts. Actually, we already mentioned a little bit in the previous video, in a circular flow chart. So here, the three concepts we will learn is market, supply and demand. So when I talk about market, and you will say, I know what it is. So that is something happening right across the street. Every day, every weekend, we have the farmers market. So that is market. But we have so many different kind of market. Can we find a universal definition to define markets? So how we define market? So market exists whenever an exchange or transaction take place. So actually, if you look at the definition, how the economists define a market, you will find actually it's very broad definition. So every places, if you see an exchange take place, and we will consider it as market. So for instance, you're taking too many classes. For instance, you take 5 classes, and there is one class you feel, oh, I cannot finish the homework. And then there is your friend taking the same class, and then you told him, if you can help me to finish this homework, and I will give you $10. And if your friend is great to do that, in the classroom, for instance, and then the classroom will become a market because there is exchange. So you give him or her money, and then to trade for her or his time, and also her or his energy. So obviously, I don't encourage you to do that, and actually, it's really bad. But I just want using this example to illustrate how the economists to define the market, because it's going to be a little bit different from what you thought before. And so, any places, if we have exchange or transaction take place, and we will call it market. And also nowadays we have the stock market. So the people treating the stock, they don't, the buyer and the seller don't even need to see each other. So they will have those transactions. So it is a market as well. So hopefully you will keep in mind, you will have a better understanding about the definition for market after this lecture. So it is any places, anywhere, if we have exchange or transaction take place, and we'll identify it is as a market. So let's connect this concept with our circular flow chart we just learned. So every market transaction involves an exchange of dollars for goods and service in the product market or resource in factor market. And in the circular chart, with a circular flow chart, we find good and service or resource flow one way, but the dollar always flow to the opposite way. So that's what exactly I explained when we are saying the circular flow chart. So after we look at the market, I have to define the very important concept called the supply and the demand. So during the whole semester, you will see this pair of the concept multiple times. Before we really start to use them, we have to define what is supply. So you can think about how, if I will ask you to define what is supply, how will you define it? Maybe you just say supply is somebody offer goods. And how about demand? And maybe you want to say is somebody willing to buy stuff, so that you call demand. So I cannot say you're wrong, but it's incomplete. So let's see how we define the supply and the demand, and I will give you explanation why we have to emphasize certain keywords. So Supply is the ability and willingness to sell specific quantities of a good at alternative price in a given time period. Ceteris paribus. So first of all, don't be bothered by the last phrase, ceteris paribus. I will explain it later. But let's just look at the whole sentence before ceteris paribus. So the economists define supply as the ability and willingness to sell. So which means you are not only want to sell, but also you should be able to sell. So for instance, if you said, I really want to sell cars, that's my dream. But if you don't have the dealership with you, you cannot sell a bunch of cars. So which means in that scenario, you don't have ability to sell. You only willing to sell. So for instance, in another scenario, you have a very cute dog. Let's say it's a German Shepherd, and you love it so much, and your friend actually offered to buy it, adopt it. But so obviously you can sell him or her, but you don't want that. because that is your dog. So in that scenario, we also don't see you are supplying something, because even you can sell it, but you are not willing to sell it. So that in that scenario, it doesn't satisfy the definition of supply, then you are not supplying the dog. So the key word here for the supply is ability and willingness to sell. And so the third is given time period. And you can find later in all the definition in economics word, we do emphasize the time, because the time in the business world, everything changing so fast. As time goes by, everything will be changed. So when we talk about supply, you have to keep in mind it's given time period, and this person, people's ability and willingness to sell, that is supply. And how about demand? Very similar. Demand is the ability and the willingness to buy specific quantity of the good at alternative prices in a given time period. So here we also emphasize ability and willingness. So people who want to buy it, but if they cannot afford it, and we don't call it the demand. And if the people are can buy it, but they don't want to buy it, and also we don't call it the demand. So for instance, many people like Tesla, they really want to have a Tesla, but they're just very expensive. So if people just want to buy it, but nobody can afford it, then those people will not be able to contribute to the demand. Only the people who has the money to afford the product and then they are willingness to buy, and we are consider that as demand. So you can see both definitions have the ending with a phrase called ceteris paribus. So what does that mean? So ceteris paribus actually is a Latin phrase. The meaning is the assumption that nothing else is changing. So why we need to impose this assumption? So keep in mind, economics is a science and it's a social science. So when you talk about science, it's related to experiments and try to figure out how the things works. So if you don't give this assumption that nothing else except the price and the demand, if we don't assume other things not changing, you will end up very complicated situation. By imposing this assumption, it's allowing us to focus on the key factors instead of being distracted by other unimportant factors. So it doesn't mean imposing this assumption doesn't mean our model is not working well, or we are talking about something ideal and that may not work well in the real life. It is not right. So imposing this assumption allows us more accurately, better to estimate the average performance of each individual participant on the market. So don't get frustrated about this assumption. Actually, this assumption allows us to get our better result. Ceteris paribus, that means the assumption that nothing else is changing. So in our next video, we're actually gonna learn more about the law of demand, the demand schedule, and we're even able to analyzing at what condition that the demand will change.